All right. I want to introduce a team from Nava. Thank you all for coming. I'm super excited. Nava is a fantastic open source services company in DC, doing great work with healthcare and other government services. Simplegrants.gov. I'm really excited to see what you are doing there. And here, Brandon, I think, is going to give a talk on Tuesday at the conference. So without further ado, Martel,
Yeah,
please take it away.
great. Let me make sure I can share the screen. Share, and let's go. Oop, hold on one moment. If I share with my presenter view, do you just see the slides or do you see my notes?
No, it looks good.
Looks good. Okay, great. Yeah, well, thank you very much for having us. My name is Martel Esposito. I'm the Partnerships and Evaluation Manager at Nava and the co-lead of Nava Labs. And we're really excited to share about our research on AI solutions to help support benefits navigation and enrollment. And all of these solutions are open source. I'm also thrilled to be here presenting with my colleague, Kevin Boyer, who's the engineering lead. But this slide also shows the whole amazing project team, some of whom we have with us today. Are available to answer. We'll jump in for some questions maybe at the end. So a little bit about Nava first. Nava is a public benefit corporation. We work directly with government agencies to change the way people experience government, hopefully for the better. We're getting our start. We got our start as part of the rescue team of healthcare.gov. And we have deep experience over the last decade leading some of the most complex modernizations at the state and federal government level. Nava Labs, who the team here represents today, is a more recent branch of Nava, and our work focuses on incubating products, practices, and policy ideas, and building evidence, cultivating partnerships, and advocating for change. So our work is really focused on learning and sharing out, which is one of the reasons we're here today. The Nava Labs group is currently leading Nava's responsible AI research that we're going to talk more about. So a little bit first about our project before we dive into some of the demos. Our project is researching, prototyping, and testing open source AI-powered tools to assist caseworkers and call center agents who help people navigate and enroll in various public benefits. So why are we doing this? So navigating and enrolling in health and human services benefits is challenging. Policies and processes are complex. Many people need help from benefits navigators like call center agents and caseworkers to help them. It's also challenging on the caseworker side. So there are several administrative challenges to benefits navigation services. So there can be a good amount of administrative burden for the caseworkers who have to understand each family's particular issues and then try to search and match what programs they might be eligible for. It can be costly to train people. It can be hard to maintain people. And in call centers in particular, it can lead to longer call center wait times. So we are building these tools to try to address some of these challenges. And then understanding who we are working with many partners. Notably, we are funded through philanthropic funders. We're working with a research team at the Georgetown Better Government Lab on measuring administrative burden and accuracy and bias. Our pilot partner is Imagine LA. They're a nonprofit based in California in Los Angeles County. And they have some existing technology tools that help various agencies and nonprofits understand different benefits, both at the federal benefits and state level benefits, and sometimes local benefits as well. So we're working with them to pilot our AI technology on top of that that existing technology. And then we're also working with beneficiaries. And how are we doing this work? We've been doing it with a phased approach of discovery research with these various stakeholders to understand what the challenges are, building proofs of concept, and then focusing on prototyping and pilots. So there's a big emphasis on testing, evaluation, iteration, and learning. And we've been engaging staff and families through every step of the way to get feedback. And then finally, our project focuses on AI solutions with a human in the loop, which means that it's focused on caseworkers rather than end beneficiaries of these programs. And this is to help uh, augment and support caseworkers rather than replace them. And also the goal is that the caseworker experience and expertise combined with the AI solutions to make their lives a little bit easier. Our hypothesis is this will result in better enrollment and referral outcomes, and maybe help address some of those other burdens. This approach also helps us mitigate risks, various different risks that can be associated with AI solutions, and it ensures that we test for and improve the accuracy of our tools. We validate the appropriateness of that problem solution fit for the generative AI technology, and whether and how the prototypes fit into staff workflows and address those burdens before scaling the implementation of the tool. So kind of where we are right now is we've developed 4 prototypes, and we have made one of those prototypes quite developed to the point that we're now actually piloting it in the Imagine LA setting. So I'm going to pass it off to Kevin now to share some about all of those different prototypes, and some of the promising early feedback we've gotten from our testing so far.
Cool. Thanks, Marcel. Do you want to keep sharing your screen and I can just kind of say next slide as we go
Yeah, I
through?
can do that. That sounds good.
All right. We'll test it out now. So next slide, please. Perfect. So really happy to be speaking with you all today. Appreciate you all making the time. And also I realize this is a more technical audience, which is kind of exciting for me. One of the things that you'll see in these slides is that we're also frequently giving this to government leadership. And so some of these demos are actually screenshots, because I found early on when I would pull up the terminal and be running code there that the assistant secretary of health for some state would be like, whoa, what is this? Like, this isn't production ready, clearly. But first, I kind of want to zoom out and talk about our general approach on this project, which at the beginning, during the prototyping phase, involved writing very little code. As you all know, the field is moving so fast. So some of this stuff is even, I think, kind of out of date now, including some of the early results we found. But when we first started, we tried to just explore what can these LLMs do. There's a great blog post from, I believe his name is Simon Willison, where he uses a metaphor of it's like these giant models just landed from space on a USB stick. And we kind of know on one technical mathematical sense exactly what's happening in them. But in another very real sense, we're all still kind of poking these things with sticks and saying what are they good at? What are they not so good at? How can we try to understand how we can manipulate or change the responses by changing the model weights, things like that. And so when we started this project about 1.5 years ago, no one had really been doing this looking at the benefit space in particular. So a lot of our early prototypes weren't so much writing code as they were pulling up a ChatGPT or an Anthropic Claude window and doing things like uploading a zip file of the PDFs that make up the SNAP regulations and seeing how well it could pull and extract information out of those and cite those. So Martel, if you click to the next slide, I'll give one example of a demo that's not on here, or a proof of concept that's not on here, but that I think would be really interesting to revisit now. And it kind of gets to our attempt to just kind of understand what these things are capable of that could plausibly be useful in the benefits space. So one idea we had was, could we have like a paperwork assistant here? And the way we tested this, the idea was like, folks often are filling out paperwork forms for something like a food stamps application, and they often have questions, which great if they can get someone in a contact center on the call, but what if we could have an application that just kind of followed along with you as you were filling out your paperwork and provided guidance like, hey, you checked this box for you do own rental property. So in that case, you need to go download this other form or something like that. The way we tested this proof of concept, and I kind of use air quotes there, is we literally printed off a copy of a state's paperwork for a SNAP food benefits application, hand filled it out a couple of different ways with like different boxes checked, took pictures on our cell phones, and then uploaded it to ChatGPT with some like handcrafted prompt like, hey, take a look at this image. Let me know if it's like anything is wrong here or if there are like next steps that aren't going to be obvious to me. When we were doing this back in January of 2024, it did not work very well. OpenAI's models would miss kind of very clear, like this required radio box with one of them options wasn't checked, things like that. But that's the kind of thing that we were doing, was just seeing what they were good at. And now, I suspect that if we went back and tried that with some of these newer models like O1, we might find very different results. So with that kind of table setting, I'll walk through each of these pretty quickly. I'll also call out two things. One is these are all, you can see all the code for this in our open source GitHub repos. If we haven't set those in advance, I'll make sure we follow up and just get you the links to those. You can also find those on Nava PBC's GitHub organization account, which is just /Nava PBC. So Martel, if you click to the next slide, I'll talk about the assistive chatbot, which is the first prototype we started to feel really good about. Sorry, not the assistive chatbot, the referrals generator. So again, this came less from writing code so much as talking with actual case managers and folks who work in offices like WIC and work with clients every day. One of the common things that we heard from talking to these folks was, hey, I am constantly needing to refer folks to services and resources beyond just the particular public policy program that I work for. So like I'm on the phone with a client and they're talking about, we're not only talking about getting them rental assistance, for example, but as I'm talking with them, I realize, they have just moved to this area and they have no furniture. And I happen to know of a furniture bank in the city that lets them get access to that on a temporary basis while they're getting started. But there's no centralized database that does this really well. In practice, what we found was often it was like Excel spreadsheets that were just getting copied around. You'd have like version 3_final_v2. And then, different folks who worked at the nonprofit would maybe forward it to folks who worked at a different nonprofit. They'd be editing this in. Best case scenario, you're working in like Google Docs or something like that, where it's all a shared copy. So we had this thought of like, could we combine these things and say like, okay, we're going to put in a transcript of the call, or maybe it's like the case notes of the client. And we're going to use generative AI to pull out from that what it thinks their needs likely are beyond just the particular public program that they've called in for. And then from there, have it like crawl the spreadsheet or the Word doc or whatever like the file or files are, and start to do kind of like some fuzzy matching almost of like, hey, you might consider recommending this particular resource. So in the next slide, I have a screenshot of what that looks like. This was kind of our early testing based on some kind of representative information that contact center agents had. And it works pretty well. I mean, a big denominator here is the quality of the input data that you have in the spreadsheets or whatever you're working for. We did also connect this. It's like integrating data across multiple sources. So one is a spreadsheet that a nonprofit agency in New York was kind enough to share with us. Another was actually a well-structured API. It's the National 211 API that in theory kind of provides this in a programmatic way. And it works pretty well to both generate queries for the API that are appropriately kind of select rows out of the spreadsheet and then merge them into this more like human-friendly output here. Martel, if you want to quickly go on the next slide and then jump forward. So, we have some slides here that just share some early feedback we got from testing these ideas. And then on the next slide, I'll talk about the call center summarizer. This is a really interesting one to me. The problem is fairly, I think I actually saw maybe an AI assistant join this Zoom call. But the problem space is probably familiar to you all, right? This idea of like meetings or calls, and there's a lot of details and you're taking notes by hand. Best case, you capture everything. It's time consuming. Again, when we talked to folks who like work in this space, one of the things we repeatedly heard was, hey, the more specific I can be in the follow-up steps that I share with a client after I get off the phone with them or after I'm finished meeting with them in person or in a home visit, the more likely it is that they will actually take action on that and won't, kind of run into the first roadblock and then shut down. So like an example we heard was one WIC caseworker told us, I will tell folks, call this number, ask for this specific name to get yourself enrolled in Medicaid. If they're not available, ask them to call you back, right? So that's it's not just hey, you should go see if you're eligible to enroll in Medicaid or something like that. It's a far more specific level of, I have local knowledge of this particular person that can be helpful to you here. And if you don't hear back, the next step isn't to just give up on the process, it's to call me back or to leave them a voicemail with your phone number, things like that. And so our hope with this proof of concept was to take the existing format that case managers already have a personal preference for how they do follow-up, whether it's like an email with a bulleted list or some kind of other note or table of things with dates associated with them, and say okay, you can kind of pre-program in your desired output format, and then this tool will listen in on the transcript, take it, and then try to condense and summarize the information into this next step. So we have a screenshot of that on the next slide. And we actually got this by asking contact center agents to do mock conversations for us. So this isn't someone's real personal data. Maybe the James Joyce reference gives that away. Or maybe the phone number starting with 234 for the area code. But this was sort of what we wanted to take, was just these raw call transcripts and then transforming them into something that was actionable. And we also found this was really promising too. All right, I think the next slide has a quick quote, and then I'll get into the two that we've spent a little bit more time on, including the thing that we're currently piloting in production in Los Angeles right now. And maybe I can actually take over the screen share for just a moment, Martel, and then I might kick it back to you. This kind of transition is always the most fraught part. Okay, so I was going to say, if you've applied to one of these programs, but I think just in general, everyone is familiar with, you're all at GW, you all had to apply, you all had to provide paperwork as part of that. Paperwork is a huge challenge, or just documentation more generally, for these benefit programs as well. And the rules for them is often very, I was going to say ambiguous, but I think flexible is also an appropriate positive word to describe them. So for example, if you're applying for SNAP in South Carolina, the rule for what counts as appropriate proof of your identity is, I'm summarizing here, if there's a lawyer listening in, don't quote me on this, but it's basically if you provide something that a human would reasonably find proof of your identity, then it counts. And so if you asked me as an engineer, in 2018 or 19 or even 2020, okay, encode that in as a program that automatically does the assessment, I would have said, what's the classic XKCD comic? Great, I'll do it. Give me 5 PhD level researchers and 4 years of a research budget, and we'll figure out how to make this happen. But what's really exciting about generative AI is now that's something that's very feasible to do, is to feed in someone's scanned paperwork or a picture of it they've taken with a cell phone and ask generative AI to kind of match a human assessment here. Okay, this is someone's golf scorecard from around last week. No, that's not going to cut it for proof of ID. On the other hand, and this does count in South Carolina, if you're applying for SNAP, you can use your student ID card. You can use your library card as long as it has a photo of you on it. And so encoding that kind of universe of possibilities in typical imperative programming code or something, not really feasible. but with generative AI potentially. And so what we did was we came up with, there's a whole bunch more than just this, but I'll share these example documents. We pulled these like synthetic documents here. So someone's driver's license again, but like taken out of focus, a lease agreement, someone's tax return, and a voter registration card. And when we run this through some of these multimodal models, you're seeing GPT-4o is what's happening on the back end here, but we found Claude 3.5 Sonnet. I don't think we've tested a 3.7 yet.
Kevin, are we supposed to be seeing something live happening?
Oh, I'm sorry, I should have checked. Can you see a page that says categorized documents?
Yes, we can
Cool.
see that.
Could
Yep.
you see the documents I was just sharing?
Yes, but yes,
Okay.
we did. Yeah. Okay, now things are moving. It just nothing moved on the screen before, so just.
Oh yeah, I had pre-run it just to see.
Oh, okay, perfect.
But here I accidentally hit refresh, so I'll run it live now. So what's happening in the background here is not anything particularly technically sophisticated. It's essentially just uploading these pictures of these documents into a multimodal LLM that can handle other forms of media besides text. And then a fairly detailed prompt that we did some iteration on to do things like, hey, assess whether this document is actually readable by a human, or tell us if we need to like highlight for the client, like, hey, looks like something went wrong with the photo you took here, or the scan that you made, like you might need to re-upload this. Then we started moving out to like actual content extraction. So like, given this image of a document, can you tell us what kinds of evidence, what kind of document it is? And it does really good at this. So these things aren't pre-programmed in, right? I mean, I'm asking it like, tell me whether it's legible or not here. And interestingly for this crowd, we actually had to do some non-trivial kind of prompt experimentation here because we found that what the multimodal LLMs consider legible is way past what like a human being would consider appropriately readable. So like I had to like basically tell it like, you're being too optimistic. Just because you can read these blurred pixels does not mean a human can. Like, and this is open source. Like you can see the prompt where I think I'm like saying it in all caps, like, be very conservative with what you consider readable here. But this kind of stuff isn't programmed in. Like we're just asking it like, give me the generic document type of what you're seeing. We've also done this with stuff like, I didn't include it because I couldn't find a synthetic example. Like I used one of my utility bills, for example, when we were testing this. This evidence column is programmed in. So these are things that you need to be able to prove or provide evidence for as part of your Snap application. And it does a pretty good job of appropriately mapping these things. Like a utility bill is perfectly fine proof of your residence, your current address. On the other hand, it doesn't qualify as proof of your identity. And you can see we're even starting to show some like fuller text extraction. I won't belabor this too much because I know this is an audience that's probably pretty familiar with these capabilities. We actually even went as far as just saying like, just tell us, like you pick out, like no pre-programming to say like, give us the address in this document. Pull out from this, what do you think the important key value information is? So like for the lease, it recognizes like I should pull out the name of the landlord, the name of the tenant, lease start, end, monthly rent, total rent, things like this. This is really interesting because it's a huge blocker and the cause of a lot of delays for benefit programs. At the VA, you might upload documentation for like a medical claim or something like that. It then goes to the back, it's a, I don't know how many computer science we have. It's a first in, first out queue. Am I getting that right? So if you apply, you might wait like 2 months until a human can look at it. And then they might say like, sorry, like the doctor form you provided here is actually the wrong one. You need to upload something else. And then now you're back at the end of the queue again, and you're waiting another 2 months after you get the next form. So if we can use this to kind of share up front with folks, like, hey, this is just AI generated, so it might be wrong. You could ignore it. But it looks like you forgot to upload something that would cover proof of your identity. Or like, hey, I can see you uploaded a tax return, but it's a little too blurry. A human's not going to be able to read that. Consider taking another photo. If you've ever done like electronic check caching, and you've seen like, that's where I've seen it, right? In my bank app, it'll say like, this photo looks like it's out of focus. Like this check picture is not going to clear. Excitingly, this is relatively cheap. It's about $0.01 per page. not quite fast enough yet for real time, but like, who knows? Maybe what I'm saying is going to be out of date when we hopefully talk to you all again in March of 2026, because stuff is moving fast here. Another interesting caveat, and then I'll move on to our chatbot, and then you won't have to.
Can I ask a question while
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
here?
absolutely.
So these were with proprietary models. Have you found any open source models that can compete on these tasks? Or are the proprietary still pretty far ahead on this type of task?
On this type of task, we haven't tested in the last 6 months. I know there have been some huge changes. So we probably should. When we did look at this at the beginning-ish, like probably February to April or May of last year, unfortunately, the proprietary models were pretty far ahead. That was sort of an early hope for us as a team, was like, can we use open source models or models that are running locally? And early last year, they just weren't performing well on this kind of like multimodal task, but that may have changed. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions?
That's it. The obvious follow-up to that is then, okay, so we're going to give OpenAI all of our personal information by doing this. So ideally, this would be like run at least in the future, something like Llama or something being run on a private server, or something where this is all protected and not sharing that information. I don't know.
There's such a huge market opportunity here that I'm both perplexed and also like pretty confident that OpenAI and Anthropic and the other major proprietary players will recognize they need to provide some kind of capability that is appropriate to use for sensitive data here. Confusingly, so if you were to route this through Anthropic's API directly, you get very poor, in my opinion, guarantees of the protection of the data that you're sending to them. They won't make any kind of promise about like zero data retention and so on. If you go through, still using the Anthropic models, but if you go through the AWS, so Amazon's Bedrock API, then they will. So where we've seen this used is Accenture is using AWS's Bedrock API to do this kind of document processing. It's still using Anthropic's models, but the model like inference is being done on AWS hardware, and AWS guarantees that the data is not retained at all. So you can send it over, a VPC connection or HTTPS. It gets run on AWS hardware, but it's Anthropic's weights, and then they send you the output back, and that's the end of it. So privacy is like a huge concern here, and no, it's not currently available through any of these like proprietary providers yet, for reasons that like frankly are kind of beyond me. I have to imagine it's on their roadmap, but right now you can do it through AWS for like more modest protection guarantees that it's not being retained or consumed anywhere else.
I don't know if anybody would trust it if they offered, though. I mean, if they're like, oh, sure, you can pay for this premium subscription, we definitely won't steal that data, even though our entire model is built on stolen data. Like, so I don't know. It's sort of, I'd say that's pretty sus.
Yeah, for sure. I don't disagree. I think what's interesting too is like the extent to which the cloud providers make guarantees for the government on like FedRAMP is a common requirement, or like FISMA protection. Those kind of things provide more trusted guarantees, and even like AWS Bedrock does not yet like conform with those requirements. In the future, I imagine it probably will, but it's a fairly heavy compliance lift for like the cloud providers to meet those. But that starts to get things where like they're basically making like formal guarantees to the federal government that like data is not leaving a particular security perimeter or fence. But yeah, I agree. One of the things I hope our team will have the time to do in the future is like, if these open source models are catching up to that point, can we do something where we like provision hardware within like the AWS GovCloud or like Azure equivalent, so that the code that's kind of running inference is just fully under our control, and we can be sure the data isn't moving and somehow leaking out somewhere else.
Thanks.
Very cool.
All right, one more quick caveat on this, because I think it's like an interesting thing to think about how you plug this technology into like the benefits use case or broadly for government. So privacy is kind of a big one. The other is when I share this, I sometimes get asked like, oh, this is great. Can we use this for like fraud detection? And the answer is like, actually, it's the opposite. Like these models can so easily be fooled by a malicious actor that you can't use this at all in place of human review. And the demo I usually give here is like, I like take a crayon and like scrawl on an index card, like this is photo ID, and it's proof that I'm David Lippert, for example. And if you run it through these models, like there's no, you can kind of try to share in the prompt, but it's sort of like a arms race where you're always going to be one step behind truly malicious attackers. The models will just kind of credulously believe, you know, the image is itself just a kind of the prompt and it's under the user's control. So with the government, we talk a lot about like both the privacy concern and also saying like, you can use this to give fast feedback to folks and say like, hey, it looks like you're missing this document, or like this might be, you know, taken out of focus, or like missing some information that you need, but you can't use it to replace the human review. It can kind of only accelerate the total latency of the system.
You answered my question. I was going to ask if the McLovin ID would get through this system.
Oh my gosh. That is a better demo than my like index card. So I'm going to steal that in the future. It absolutely would, is the quick answer. Yeah.
All right, shall we maybe move on to the last demo, and then we can come back to questions?
Yeah. Let me find the browser tab that I was going to share with you all for that. So unfortunately I can't see you all, so I can't, but I imagine if I asked like, have you all heard of retrieval augmented generation? We get a number of hands up. And that's what the last demo is. So from talking with caseworkers, they often run into these like edge cases or like programs that they are sort of familiar with but haven't yet quite heard about. Just to check so I don't do it again, you can now see something that says like search in like a giant green bar at the top of the screen. Cool. And so what we're actually piloting right now in Los Angeles with a number of different nonprofit organizations is a chatbot that uses retrieval augmented generation under the hood. And so this is embedded in a larger product that Nava did not build. Our partner Imagine LA built, called the Benefits Navigator, which is sort of like a lightweight case management tool for all these different nonprofits to use. And what we build is actually just an API, and it has like an ETL pipeline under it that's sort of constantly trawling different trusted sources of government information. So like the CalFresh website, for example, which is California's version of food stamps, scraping the content from them when it's HTML, or like parsing PDFs when it's like policy manuals, things like that. Storing them all in a vector database, which for us is just Postgres under the hood, and then doing retrieval augmented generation on that. So when you ask a question here, it gets sent over to our API. We're then doing semantic search using the vector embeddings to try to find related data sources. We're pre-processing your response in a few different ways. So one is we're trying to understand like, what language did you ask this in, so we can do appropriate translation if we need to. What benefit program did you ask about? So like, if you ask our California chatbot about how to file your taxes in Louisiana, it can appropriately say back like, I don't know how to help you with that. Like, you shouldn't trust my responses here. And then after we kind of do all those checks in the pipeline, then we do like a vector search, try to find matching documents and send them all to an LLM where we ask it like, hey, combine this question with these underlying retrieved documents and try to produce an answer and like cite sources back. And a big part of what we're trying to do here is make it really easy for the benefit navigators using this product to be able to themselves assess whether the chatbot is making something up or not. So we try to do that primarily through making these citations really easy to see. The other thing we're doing that's a little bit, I think, unique for the space of chatbots here is this text is actually the original source content, and it's guaranteed to be that. And so what I mean by guaranteed to be is most chatbot implementations, when they generate these citations, they actually ask the LLM to generate them. And they say like, hey, you know, LLM, provide a response to this and include citations, including the original source text. And so like part of the tokens that are coming out in most chatbots are these, like these are output from the LLM. Now, large foundational models are generally pretty good that they get these pretty close or exact in most cases. But we wanted like a stronger guarantee of that. So what's actually happening here is if you were to look at the underlying response from the chatbot, what we tell it to do, we split the source documents into like almost sentence by sentence level slices. And we tell it like, don't try to quote the underlying source material. Tell us like what locations in these documents you want us to cite. So like here, I want to cite sentence 2, 3, and 4. And then we on our end go in and look at the underlying documents and like kind of reassemble. Okay, let's pull sentences 2 through 4 from this document, concatenate them, and then throw them into a citation here. Our team kind of shamelessly, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, quick question. There's a lot of changes going on in these documents right now with underlying words being removed or entire documents or sets being removed. How is that impacting your work?
Yeah, it means we have to do data refresh a lot more frequently, right? And so one of the design questions that we've had has been, how can we surface the like age of the citation out? So right now, the guarantee we make to the navigators using this in pilot is we say, hey, you will see something that is no older than 7 days when you're using this chatbot, because we're guaranteeing we'll run a refresh at least once every week on this. Another idea we have too is like, can we actually just make that more clear? And you don't see it yet because we haven't implemented this feature yet, but trying to say like, hey, this page was last crawled on March 17th, for example, so that folks can kind of quickly orient themselves to like, how potentially out of date is this information? Yeah. Other questions?
One general question that I have for all of your agents is, how do you evaluate trust between the AI and the human in the loop? You know, how do you like figure out if they trust it, should they trust it? How do you evaluate that process?
Yeah, we have kind of a passive and an active mechanism. So one passive mechanism here is this like direct feedback, which we ask folks to use. And the development team is kind of monitoring this every day. And we're also just tracking usage generally to understand like, hey, did it get something right or wrong here? That's sort of the passive mechanism because it relies on someone coming back and telling us like, hey, I thought this answer was good. And one of the interesting things we find is when folks are using this tool for the first time, they'll often ask it something that they know the answer to because they're like, maybe it's like some skepticism or like they're just interested in it and they kind of want to try it out. But they're like, I know at this point from being on this team what CDCTC is, so I just did it here. But they'll ask questions like, what is Snap or something like that to try to get a sense of like how it works and what they can expect it to give content back about. Yeah. I will stop sharing my screen because Martel talks a little bit, or Martel, I can also cover it, but on the very next slide, we talk a little bit about starting to evaluate more actively or more proactive looking into how folks are using it and how they're getting the answers back. And largely what it looks like is hooking the inputs and outputs of the tool into, in this case, a third-party evaluation platform called Literal AI, although we're also doing some work to kind of lift ourselves out of that platform and just store it ourselves in a database because it's kind of straightforward information. And then we're matching that with policy subject matter expert generated answers and then starting to compare. So you can kind of see an example of that on the screen where we're pushing this into a table and then a human is going through and kind of hand annotating answers, saying like, is this good? Are the citations relevant? We're also doing some automated measurement around out of the like retrieved documents, are those helpful? Like are folks asking questions and then we just grab a totally unrelated set of documents so the LM kind of has no chance to answer this correctly from the start. So yeah, one part of this is like the kind of automated metrics around like we're measuring retrieval. Is that working well? Are we generally getting relevant documents about? The more human-driven part of this is around comparing the answers we're getting with ground truth and then making tweaks as we see where we're differing or where we're getting something unexpected.
And I'll also add that some of this work is for purposes of improving the product in real time through the pilot and for the next iterations. And part of it is being done from a more academic lens with our Georgetown Better Government Lab partners. And so we do hope to publish eventually on this work so that it can be, other folks can use our same methodologies for how we've been doing this work.
And that's even kind of like leveling up too, right? As an engineer, I often get like tunnel vision here, and I'm sort of like, okay, I built this system or my team's built this system where you put in questions, you get answers out. Like, are those answers accurate? The academic is even partnership is even looking one level up, which is like, okay, who cares really if this chatbot is accurate? Is it actually making people faster at their jobs? Are they able to help more clients or get clients more likely to get enrolled in these programs if this tool is available to them, which is really interesting.
Yeah, this idea of are we getting to more accurate and quicker results with the human plus the chatbot? So we've been using the term relative accuracy to define that particular indicator.
Yeah, that was sort of a really interesting, or maybe shocking is the word for it, early discovery from our team. Because at first we were sort of like, okay, well, we know LLMs, we can't make any kind of pledge for 100% accuracy here. And so early on, what we found is, well, if you actually look at the baseline for human accuracy, like how well do trained experts do in answering these questions? It is quite a bit lower than you might expect. It is south of like 80%. It gets south of 70% once you start answering more, asking kind of more complex scenario questions. When we started talking with other companies in the field, like huge ones, like, I think this term is not out of date, but like the FANG level companies and stuff for theirs, their baseline for their pushing these to production was something like 50% or 60% accuracy. I mean, again, don't quote me on this stuff.
50% is a coin flip.
Right.
That's
But better than human.
So we really started to think like, okay, like if we're combining this with humans, like we just need to help them be slightly more accurate than they would be operating totally on their own without this tool. So the target doesn't need to be 100%. It needs to be unbiased, and it needs to be helpful, more helpful than just having them operate in a vacuum here.
Yeah. And the way a lot of the caseworkers are kind of like conceptualizing it is it's like a more sophisticated search for them. So instead of having to go like search through documents manually or look through those different spreadsheets on their own, the chatbot is helping them get to that citation, that quote, that particular part in these very long, often complex policy documents.
knowing that the professionals could be wrong when they hit that thumb down in the feedback loop, they could be wrong and the AI could be right. How does that get? How do you resolve that discrepancy?
Yeah, I don't think we've yet seen a case of that. And I'll say in general, the kind of like passive prompting for feedback at the level of a pilot, we see a little bit of usage of it, but it's hard just from a human design perspective to get folks to like really engage with that. Where we're using the feedback so far, we haven't yet seen the case of like someone marks a thumbs down. We actually disagree with that assessment. But where we do get it is we then go in and say like, okay, now we can look at this like user input query and try to understand where did the LLM go wrong here? Or alternatively, what did the user like about the particular response? Because we've also seen like thumbs up and they say like, I'm glad it clarified this particular point. And we can kind of zoom out and think like, what's the generalizable case there of like, can we tell the LLM to like provide more context or more caveats so other users are seeing a similar style of response? Or, when it gets something wrong, often what we find is that like, we just haven't ingested the right data source yet, or there's something like ambiguous about the user's question in a way that's would be obvious to a human being that like, hey, they just asked a question about SNAP and their second question was about income limits. They didn't specify SNAP in the question, but like it's related to their earlier question. So like that's the benefit program they're asking about. So like that's how we're using the feedback right now, is to take a very like manual approach of investigating, hey, we got a thumbs up or a thumbs down. What's the tweak we can make to kind of fix this specific case and like hopefully also address a pool of other cases as well.
So we had a presentation the other week on lang use and chatbot response evaluation. Are you planning to pull your evaluation tool out as a separate open source project? Because there isn't really anything in the open source, I don't think at this point, but it's pretty basic, as you said. It's just hooking it to a database, and then for the automated parts, at least, it's just using other LLMs.
We've been having some early conversations on how to how to platformize some of the things we've been doing and have it be a tool that could potentially be shared. But I'll let Kevin share a little bit more about that.
Oh, yeah, I was going to quickly say the answer is yes. In fact, one of the things we're interested in is like, can we also share in some format that's useful to field the like set, like not just open source, the data collection, which is in theory open source, but it's part of this kind of larger repo. So it's not, you'd have to do work to like extract it and apply it to a different project. But also can we open source like the actual data itself? Because I think like the hand annotated, like this question should get this kind of response, which we expect for our particular use case to cite these particular documents. There's been like a non-trivial level of human effort put into producing that. And that I think is very applicable to like another nonprofit working on these particular tax credits or on rental assistance in California, things like that. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I think they have more slides.
No.
Oh, I think this is kind of the closing, but yeah.
Yeah, this is the end. I was just getting to the official end slides.
And we have this very formal labs@navapbc.com email, but Marta, I think we can also like follow up like all of our personal emails are just like first name, last name at Nava. So Kevin Boyer at navapbc.com.
Yeah, exactly.
Would love to talk more with any of you all, even if it's just like, hey, I want to do this for my own thing. I think I saw an awesome demo of I think from some GW students actually at maybe BenCon this past fall, where folks had put together like a form builder from like you could draw a form by hand, feed it into an LLM, and it produced the code for you. So would love to talk with you all about what you all are working on too.
Yeah. And then the last thing I'll say is that in addition to being very pro open source with this work from a technology lens, we are also very open with sharing out our processes and how we have done everything. So there's a web page on the Nava website that has several case studies that showcase all these steps that we've taken to get to where we are, as well as a few toolkits. And actually, we recently published another one that's not actually on this slide, and I'm realizing that now. But yeah, please check out the website for more details on our processes and our the way we went about doing the technical work.
I love your process, your general process for you know, working with users directly and prototyping first, basing it off of research and then iterating. That's I had a long career delivering disruptive technology as a data engineer and software architect, and I was like, every time you just sit next to the users that you're delivering for and talk to them and iterate quickly, you succeed. And every time you don't, and the users are far away, you fail. And so I feel like, you know, if you have those things covered, you probably have a pretty high success rate.
Yeah, we love to hear that.
Yeah, so I guess another question. So you mentioned your Git repos. So I guess, are these like open source projects where you are the maintainers? And you have a development team who's developing these tools? Or is it open source because you make what you've developed available? Or like, do you have like contributors who come to your Git repo and work on your code? Or is it just there for people to fork and use if they want to do something different?
Yeah, the latter. So certainly if someone opened a pull request tomorrow from out to the team, I'd be like, oh, let's take a look at this. Like, let's see what's going on. We haven't had it actually happen on this project. We have had it happen on other Nava projects on our platform. We had like a drive-by PR and we were like, oh, okay, thanks. We'll take it. But yeah, the intent is to make it easy for anyone else who's interested in these ideas to either take what we've done and just like look at it as a reference point and be like, this is interesting. God, no, I wouldn't do it that way, and like move on and take it and build on it. For the chatbot specifically, as we get to the close of the pilot phase, we're going to try to update the code and documentation with an eye of making it really easy for anyone in the field to clone the repo and get it up and running and start customizing it for their own context. Not with the intent that like closer to like a fork than like with the idea that they would then keep contributing back upstream. But with the idea that like if they were like, oh, this is a really cool product, like I have a technical team at my, health and human services agency here. Like, let me send them this repo and see if they can get this up and running, and we could start to like customize it totally under our own, control and interest. So right now, the repo for the chatbot documentation is a little more like you are an engineer and you are like interested in this, but we do want to kind of like, I don't want to say productize because the goal is not to sell this or like license it. It's under I think Apache license is what we've landed on. But the goal is that it's productized in the sense that like someone else could clone it and then go with it and run with it and make it their own.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I know Remy the Cosmaker was in at your conference. Are you working with him at all? The reason I'm asking is because they are open sourcing everything, a lot of their work at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and he's very intentionally making their projects a community project, where we were planning before the disruption of government, and now it looks like maybe we can still continue with those plans, doing things like capstone projects where students can, sign up to an issue or a feature, and actually build out something for a capstone class, and contribute to a real project that's going to be used by our federal government, and then put that on their resume, and just be really excited about it, and also possible internship opportunities in the summer, all built around contributing to open source projects. So I'm curious if you're thinking that way or.
Yeah, I think
I
we should
like the
definitely talk
idea.
more about this. Yeah.
What'd you say?
I said we should definitely talk more
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
This particular project is funded under like a direct grant. So the future of it will be determined by the future of like the Nava, like active continuing to contribute features and iterating on will be a little bit determined by that. But what I'm actually thinking about is like, we're starting to build out early stages of open source toolkits that state governments can use or development teams can use to build out benefits programs. So early on, like our probably biggest open source project right now is actually far more lower level. It's like, here's a template you can use to get some basic common AWS infrastructure up and running or Azure infrastructure up and running that you almost certainly need for some kind of benefits program, like a database that has production level security guarantees around it, developer environments, things like that. Nava, at least just now, is starting to move a little bit past that like very low level of like almost more foundational open source components to save teams time, to getting into almost more the business layer of like, you can just use this SDK and get basic backend in like the staff processing sense, but backend processing software to like adjudicate claims, things like that. So that could be one really interesting opportunity. I don't know if there's a there, but yeah.
Yeah. I think we should definitely chat more about this at another time for sure. Both on the Nava side and with the GW folks.
Yeah, right.
Maybe on Monday during a break or at lunch.
Yeah, I will be in person giving a shorter version of this talk at the conference. So would be happy to chat more.
Perfect. Are you guys working with Remy and HSS at all?
We are. No, this is the work from this project has primarily been actually external to government. We've started in nonprofit space, because there's a little bit of a lower barrier to entry to be able to use the data within those ecosystems. We do have hopes that we will translate some of this work directly into government agencies' implementation in future phases of work. So would definitely love to connect to them, but we haven't worked with them for this particular project.
Okay, yeah, well, Remy will be there, and that might be a great entry point for you. Because
Great.
they're also completely open source all the way.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you
Thanks.
for having us. Looking forward to chatting more.
Yeah, see you next week.
Fantastic. Take care. Have a great day. Thank you again.
Bye. Have a good class.
Very cool stuff.